Foreign Minister, welcome to 7:30.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Sarah.
What message does it send to Beijing for Taiwan to elect a president that China sees as pro-independence?
I think China has a different perception of democracy. Taiwan is already a democracy, and we go through periodical election, fair and open periodical elections every 4 years for the national level. And this is a time for Taiwan people to decide on their next leader, and also for the Taiwan people to decide on the general policy outlook for the next 4 years. And therefore, this is an exercise of democracy. But China doesn't accept that because China is an authoritarian country. They thought they could ask the people here in Taiwan to elect a certain people. So no matter how it turns out, Taiwan's democracy or the way Taiwan democracy functions will not be seen in the eyes of the Chinese government officials as something that they would like to see. So whenever they see that Taiwan is pursuing independence, but actually it's only the Taiwanese people exercising their democratic rights.
At the same time, the incoming president said, and this is what the Chinese cite, he said in 2017, "I'm a worker for Taiwanese independence." Did he mean that at the time? And has he changed his mind?
Two things I can explain about this. If you look at the situation here in Taiwan, China does not have any jurisdiction over Taiwan. We have a president that is democratically elected, and we also have a parliament that is also democratically elected. We have military to protect ourselves. We have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to issue visa and passport, and the Taiwanese government exercises exclusive jurisdiction over the territory under its control. So this is the reality, and it's been the de facto situation over the Taiwan Strait for many decades, and many people describe this as status quo. And President-elect Lai Ching-te has stated so many times that he would like to maintain the status quo across the Taiwan Strait, or he would like to follow the policy guidelines by President Tsai for as long as he is the president. And you know very well that President Tsai has been praised internationally for being a very moderate and very responsible international leader. And I believe that President-elect Lai, for as long as he's the president here in Taiwan, he will also be a moderate and responsible political leader. And he would like to maintain the status quo, as he said, during his term as presidency.
But let's be clear, would any move towards independence, however small at this stage, trigger a war with China?
We try to prevent that kind of situation from happening. But a conflict, a possible conflict in the future in between Taiwan and China, it's not likely to be caused by Taiwan's side. It's not only the president-elect that is being described by the Chinese leaders as pro-independence or pursuing independence, and they want to use force against Taiwan at any moment. It was also the case when President Tsai is in power. The Chinese are trying to define Taiwan independence at their will, and that is very dangerous. If we want to live peacefully with each other, which is desired by the Taiwanese people, and I think also for the rest of the international community, I think the two sides should put aside the differences and come to the negotiation table to find a solution. Any military threat against the other side is not acceptable. And if you look at the presidential election here in Taiwan, China just stepped up its oral military threat against Taiwan, military threat and oral threat against Taiwan. They are telling us that the election here in Taiwan is in between peace and war. And if we elect a wrong leader, just like DPP president-elect, it will mean war. And I think for democracies around the world, we need to understand that democracy should not be decided by an authoritarian regime, no matter how strongly they feel about the election. The election is about the people. Here, they decide a national leader, and they decide the future, or they decide the policy outlook for the next 4 years. And this is the essence. China has no right to threaten Taiwan no matter what. But I think that the international community can also look at the situation in a more careful way. And if we look at the last 8 years under President Tsai, China continued to say that Taiwan is pursuing Taiwan independence, and therefore they want to use military threat, economic coercion against Taiwan. But in the last 8 years, Taiwan has been praised by the international community as being moderate and responsible. And therefore, I think the conclusion at this moment is that China has been trying to find an excuse to escalate the situation. And democracies around the world should not let that happen.
Let me put to you something that the Chinese ambassador to Australia said recently. He said, if Australia is tied to the chariot of Taiwanese separatist forces, the Australian public would be pushed into an abyss. How should Australia respond to that?
Well, I think the situation is rather clear. Australia and Taiwan are very good friends. We have been very good partners in the area of economic exchanges, cultural ties, and people-to-people exchanges. And therefore, the two countries, based on the shared values of freedom and democracy and the protection of human rights, and also the rule of law, I think we should work closer with each other. And China, on the other hand, is an authoritarian country. They have been threatening all others. And therefore, we should point to China that they should stop threatening other people.
How dangerous are the next few months in the lead up to the incoming president's inauguration?
I would say the situation would stay rather the same. There might be some ups and downs in the bilateral relations between Taiwan and the PRC in the next few months, but I would say that general peace and stability in this area can be maintained. The general source of that peace and stability comes from Taiwan and also other like-minded partners. For example, Taiwan has been pursuing a responsible and moderate policy, which has been internationally recognized. And our like-minded partners, including Australia, has been taking concrete actions to deter the Chinese from using military force against Taiwan. And with all these kinds of effort, I think we can prevent conflict from happening. You know, if you listen to the major leaders around the world, including Australia's own leaders, they have been talking about peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait has been very important. And that is a very strong language. And they also oppose unilateral change to the status quo. And they say that the peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait is inalienable to global peace and security. And with all these strong messages coming from the like-minded partners, I think China can sense that its military action against Taiwan is not going to be accepted well.
Now, immediately after the election, Nauru announced it was cutting its diplomatic ties with Taiwan in favour of China. How did China persuade Nauru to do that?
It's rather easy. Nauru is going to fall into some financial problems because the aid coming from other countries, especially from Australia, is going to reduce year by year in the next 3 years. And therefore, it becomes an easy target for the Chinese government. And the Chinese government is always using military enticement, economic enticement to secure diplomatic recognition of our diplomatic allies. And in the case of Nauru, I think the Chinese government is using that, especially during the final days of our national election, to persuade the Nauru leaders to make a switch. And I think this timing is also very interesting for us to know. It was so soon after our national election, and therefore China used that to express its displeasure to the Taiwanese voters that we elect a leader that China does not accept. But I think we should come to the final point about Taiwan's national election. Taiwan's election is for Taiwan people to decide. It's not for China to tell the Taiwanese people that you should elect this one or else.
Now, in the case of Nauru, you're saying they used financial, it was a financial enticement. Did they also target individuals in Nauru? And I mean financially.
I don't have substantial evidence in this regard. But in other cases, whether it's in the Pacific or in the Western Hemisphere. That is usually what we see. The Chinese are engaging in something that we call elite capturing. They try to bribe political elites to secure diplomatic recognition, no matter how little they have fulfilled their promises for the national development of these smaller countries. And that is what we found. And that is the kinds of practice that Taiwan or Australia will never do.
So what we're talking about there, you call that elite capturing. I want to ask you a question about what Australia should do. Should they be doing more to prevent other Pacific countries from going down the same path? And I'm thinking particularly there about Tuvalu, since they lost their pro-Taiwanese prime minister.
There's several things I can elaborate on this. For Tuvalu, I think the relations are quite solid at this moment, even though they just went through their national election. I believe the next prime minister or their next cabinet will still be loyal to the relations with Taiwan. But if you look at other cases, there's a bigger picture that we need to look at. For instance, the Solomon Islands and Kiribati and now Nauru. If you look at the map in the Pacific, they occupy very important strategic positions for Australia. And China just continues to make advancement in this regard. And that is going to be something for Australia to be concerned about. For example, about 2 years ago, China signed a security cooperation agreement with the Solomon Islands. And the Solomon Islands is so close to Australia. And now Australia understands that the Solomon Islands can be a problem strategically. And other than that, if you look at the Chinese surveillance activities in the Pacific, especially whenever Australia is having a naval exercise, the Chinese survey ships or spy ships always come very close by. And that shows the Chinese ambition over the Pacific. And this is the situation for Australia, for Taiwan, for New Zealand, Japan, the United States to be concerned about. And I'm very glad to tell you that after Solomon Islands broke ties with Taiwan, and especially after China and the Solomon Islands signed that security cooperation agreement, now all these like-minded partners are working closer than ever in preventing the situation from getting worse. And Australian government has been making so much more investment in the Pacific, which is highly welcome by Taiwan.
Now, former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott declared recently that Australia should send more high-level delegations to Taiwan, including the Prime Minister. Would Taiwan welcome that?
Well, of course, any kind of exchange between Taiwan and Australia will be welcomed by the Taiwanese government and people. And in the last few years, we have been welcoming a steady stream of parliamentarians from Australia. And the kinds of exchanges are being very fruitful. We were able to talk about all kinds of matters relating to the bilateral interests. And we also discussed the global situation, geostrategic dynamics in the Pacific. So the visits are being highly welcomed by the Taiwanese government and the Taiwanese people. And we also, we had rare opportunities to welcome Mr. Turnbull, Mr. Morrison, or Mr. Abbott to visit Taiwan in the last couple of years. These kinds of high-level visits to Taiwan can substantially improve the ties with Taiwan and at the same time allow the visitors to understand the situation so much more across the Taiwan Strait and also for the Indo-Pacific region. And we hope the Australian government can continue to allow more visitors to come to Taiwan.
And would that include welcoming a visit from the Australian Prime Minister?
This is a situation, or this is a decision to be made by Australian government, but we do not exclude any kind of possibility to welcome our friends coming from Australia. Anyone who is willing to come and visit us will be welcomed.
So there's no concern in Taiwan that some of these high-level visits provoke China?
Well, this is a consideration here in Taiwan. China has been trying to isolate Taiwan diplomatically. They are trying to squeeze Taiwan out of the international organizations. They try to snatch our diplomatic ties. They try to pressure other countries to reduce their contacts and communication and friendship with Taiwan. But the world does not operate that way. Taiwan is being harassed by China, but at the same time, there are all sorts of people around the world that would come to Taiwan and show their support, even without the Prime Minister of Australia coming to visit Taiwan. We still have speakers, or the number 2 or number 3 people in some countries, like in the Czech Republic, in Lithuania, and maybe more. Even the deputy speaker from the European Parliament, they will continue to visit Taiwan to show support and trying to deepen ties with those countries. So these kinds of visits are very welcome by the Taiwanese people. And I think the worst kinds of consideration is that when China started telling other countries that you should not do this, you should not do that, and democracy is budge, and that might not be the best kinds of response. And I think we should assess the situation. Well, if that is something for us to pursue, we should definitely pursue it. And if Taiwan democracy is threatened by the PRC, and a fellow democracy comes to support this democracy, it's a good thing. And I think we should allow more politicians or leaders to come and visit Taiwan. And this is what's been happening in the last few years, despite the Chinese military threat or diplomatic threat against other countries. We continue to have friends come to visit Taiwan.
Now,
and China will not be able to dictate how we make friends.
Now, that situation, of course, may change if Donald Trump wins the American election later this year. What happens if Donald Trump, if he were to win the election, if he were to announce to the world that it would be a safer place if Taiwan were reunited with China?
We worked with President Trump's administration a few years ago. And if you look at the track record of the relations between Taiwan and the United States when President Trump was in office, that was a period of time when Taiwan and the United States had a very rapid improvement of relations with each other. And that set the tone or set the posture for the Biden administration to pursue. So our relations with the United States remain solid at this time. And our relations with the United States is not built upon an individual or one political party against another. We try to build friendship across the board. So in the U.S. Congress, we are supported on both sides of the aisle. And we have been supported by the Republicans and also the Democrats. So even if President Trump is coming to the office again, this is hypothetical, but if he's coming to the office again, I'm sure his administration will maintain very close ties with Taiwan, just like his first administration.
Now, does Taiwan support Australia's move to acquire nuclear-powered submarines under the AUKUS deal, specifically in response to China's growing military power?
Yes, Taiwan welcomes that. Taiwan welcomes Australia playing a more important role in free and open Indo-Pacific, or play a more important role in peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. Not only that Australia has taken part in the AUKUS, that would allow Australia to acquire nuclear-powered submarines a few years down the road. And I think Australia is also trying to strengthen its own defense capabilities to play a bigger role in this region. And Australia is also a very important partner in Quad, and we also welcome that. And Australia and Japan have also signed the RAA agreement. That is almost like a security agreement. And for all this, we see that Australia seems to be determined to play a more significant role for the security in the Indo-Pacific. And this is a force for good, and this is something very positive. And this is what we need for fellow democracies to guarantee this peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific.
Now, but are you concerned that that's something that an incoming President Trump could change, that he could cancel the AUKUS arrangement?
This is hypothetical. Of course, President Trump and his administration just canceled the TPP the first day he's on the job. So it's a certain degree of unpredictability with the way he governed the United States. But for the security matters, it not only relies on the President Trump or future President Trump personally. I think it relies on the whole national security team, either in the National Security Council or the CIA or State Department or Defense Department. And I'm sure those decision makers in all this security establishment will come to a conclusion that for Australia to play a more significant role in regional peace and stability and security will be very important. And that should be an easy conclusion.
Let me ask you this, and this is for our audience to understand very clearly. This is obviously the world that you live in. You live with the dangers on a daily basis. What's at stake for Taiwan right now? We've heard President Xi describe what China calls reunification as inevitable. What would happen to Taiwan if it was taken over by China?
Well, there are several things I can say about this. One is Xi Jinping wants unification, but Taiwan is a democracy, and he has to ask the Taiwanese people. And we just went through a national election, and this was an opportunity for the political parties here to ask the Taiwanese people what kind of policy that you want. And the Taiwanese answers to that is that we want peace and stability, and we want the status quo. And it's not just the it's not just the president-elect, it's also the opposition. They also agree that maintaining the status quo is very important, and they want to follow President Tsai's policy guidelines. So this is the answer from the Taiwanese people. And the Chinese way of telling Taiwan is that we have to accept national unification. And we have to answer Hong Kong's way of unification, which is a one country, two system model. And we have been asking the Taiwanese people whether they would accept one country, two system model. And I can tell you that more than 90% of the people here reject it. And therefore, for any sensible government here in Taiwan, they would not accept that kind of model for China's policy objectives. And the second point I can elaborate is the cost for a conflict here in this region. The Taiwan Strait has about 50% of the global goods floating through it. And therefore, if the maritime transportation is interrupted, it will cause problem for the rest of the world. And in addition, Taiwan also produces a bulk part of the semiconductor chips for the rest of the world, especially the most advanced computer chips. It's about 90%. And if the global supply chain is disrupted, you can imagine that the situation will bear more impact than the war in Ukraine. And therefore, this is something that we should not accept. And therefore, for Taiwan or for like-minded partners like Australia, the United States, Japan, and etc., should come to China and say that any kind of military action should not be accepted. And I think this is exactly what our friends like Australia has been telling China, that peace and stability is very important. And they oppose unilateral change to the status quo. And we should continue to tell China that in order to safeguard peace and stability over this Taiwan Strait. And in addition, deterrence also requires actions. Taiwan is trying to beefen up its defense capabilities. And the United States, Australia, Japan has also been trying to beefen up their security capabilities as deterrence force against the PRC. And I'm very glad to see that Australia is taking part more in its cooperation with Japan or the Philippines, so that China can understand that the defense capability or deterrence capability is there to meet the Chinese challenges.
Foreign Minister Wu, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
You are absolutely welcome, Sarah.